Today, we're going to be talking about parables. Many people would have heard about parables, but most people don't understand what parables are. A parable is a simple story illustrating a moral or a religious lesson. In other words, Jesus told short stories that got people interested in the message and were easy to remember. Jesus used parables to teach people. He didn't tell the people the lesson straight up because they had to think for themselves. Context. Since we got that out of the way, we can now talk about the parable we're going to focus on. That parable is the parable of the lost sheep. But before we read that parable, we have to first understand the context of it. In the chapter leading up to this, Jesus walked up to the Pharisees' house, and in their house there was a man who was swelling up violently. When Jesus saw this man, he asked the Pharisees, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" The Pharisees didn't know what to say, so they remained quiet. Then he shared to everyone the cost of being a disciple. After all of that, we can finally read the parable. The parable of the lost sheep. Luke chapter 15, verses 1 to 7. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and goes after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he does find it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Sheep. The first thing we have to do while reading a parable is analyze or understand the symbols. The first symbol in the parable is a sheep, in the pen and outside of the pen. The sheep that are inside the pen represent the righteous people, and the sheep outside the pen represent anyone who has wandered away from God. And the shepherd represents God. In this parable, the shepherd has over 100 sheep, but one ran away. Instead of staying with the 99 he had, he left them in the open and went out to find that one lost sheep. And when he did find the sheep, he brought it back on his shoulders and threw a party for it. This parable shows the graciousness of God and his willingness to bring all kinds of wandering people back to him, and the outrageous generosity of God's grace, as the shepherd leaves the 99 in the open to find the missing one. But this example feels a bit overused. So let's use this. Imagine you had two dogs and one of them ran away. Won't you take time out of your day to look for it? Or would you just let it run away and move on? I'm assuming you'll look for it. Another example we could use is a boat crash. Imagine you're on a boat with 100 other people and the boat sinks. The search and rescue teams are 99% successful, so in this case, one person isn't found. In our eyes, the mission was successful. But what happens if you change your point of view and start looking at the situation through the eyes of the victim who wasn't found or the victim's parents? The scenario completely changes. If that was your son, you would want them to keep looking until he's found. Jesus is like that. He will look for the one lost person until they're found. The point Jesus is trying to convey is Jesus is like the search and rescue team, but he longs for you to come back to him. And Jesus himself says, "I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent than over." What Jesus is trying to say is he finds more joy in one sinner repenting than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent.